So there's a couple. They love dancing. They go dancing and they learn a new dance. And it's awesome and it's wonderful and it's great. They're both inspired and they're both really enthusiastic about this new dance that they've learned to do together. And afterwards, as they're talking about it, they're talking about what a wonderful time they had. And the man says, there is one thing that I want to tell you. When you do the turn, you're kicking me in the shins. Now, there's a lot of different ways the story can go from there. We'll go back to that. The topic of the talk this week is spiritual mountaineering. And this is inspired by the real-life experience that I had last weekend of going to Vermont with my daughter to climb mountains. I've actually been doing this for the last 5 or 6 years with my brother, whose in-laws had a ski house at Stowe, so we would go to Stowe and go mountain biking and go hiking and go, they called it a Behave Like Dave weekend because he just overdoes everything. So I would go with my brother Dave. Last year, my daughter Victoria went with us and it was wonderful. And in the intervening year, the ski house has been sold to somebody else, and our cousin's house, where this our backup place to stay in Waterbury, Vermont, is this year filled with her son and his new family. Plus, my brother's been working on this really busy project. So as we're trying to put this trip together again, it's just going to be me and Tori, and so I have to rent an Airbnb. That's okay. So did that, got this place to stay at Sugar Bush, which is 2 mountains down from the ski area where I used to go with my family. Actually, it's where my parents met 60-something years ago. So I got this Airbnb, and it's going to be a nice place. So we drive up on Wednesday, and the idea is that we are just going to go. And last year, we climbed most of the way up Mount Mansfield, which is the tallest mountain in Vermont. We didn't make it to the top. It's called the Chin, for whatever reason. So we decided we wanted to climb up to the top. Climbing a mountain and the spiritual metaphor about climbing a mountain are in fact very fitting. Because sitting here in Pennsylvania, thinking about the mountains in Vermont, we have this idea of the mountains, and we have the idea of the climb, and we have the idea of the experience. So we drove from the condo we were staying about an hour and a half to get to the trailhead. And we weren't going to climb up Stowe, which is the side that the family ski house had been on, because we didn't have that anymore. So we're climbing up the backside. I've never been on the backside of Mount Mansfield before. The part about tallest mountain in Vermont, the backside is the steep side, and the front side is pretty steep too. So I have a Fitbit. It counted 240 flights of stairs, not realizing that it was actually the mountain that we were climbing. So you start by having conversations with people and driving through this lovely foliage and doing the gradual climb up to the start of the really long slog. And then you're climbing and you're climbing and you're climbing and you're saying, when am I going to get to the top? And in the middle of the process, completely forgetting the romantic visions that I had in Philadelphia about how wonderful it is to be climbing mountains in Vermont, because now I'm just sweaty and achy and perhaps a little cranky. And we finally get up the trail to, there's a trail, a ridgeline trail. So we get up to the top of where we're doing the ascent, and we have lunch, and we lie there and take a little nap. Mount Mansfield is the most climbed peak in Vermont for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's spectacular and it's the tallest one. And oh, by the way, there are 2 ways that you can get to the top without climbing. You can drive. There's actually a road that goes up there, and there's a gondola. So you can pay somebody to whisk you almost to the top. So as we're there on the Vermont Long Trail, this is the most trafficked part of it, and it's like being on the Merritt Parkway at rush hour. There's people just walking by, back and forth, and they say stay on this particular area because they don't want you wandering around destroying the tundra or whatever it is that's up there. So it's just crowded. And that's okay. And it's different, because on the trek up on the backside of the mountain, we saw maybe 2 or 3 people the entire 2 hours that it took us to climb. Because that was the challenging part. That was the part where we were putting a lot of energy into it. Anybody recognizing the spiritual metaphor? When we're looking to climb up and get to that next level, the first thing we have to do is make the commitment to it. And the second thing that we get to do is we get to start working on it. Now, driving to the base and getting out of the car with my pack and my water, and my lunch and my daughter, that was my intention. I'm going to climb the mountain. And then there was 240 flights of stairs, 2,400 feet that we climbed to get up to the top of the mountain. And the experience changed along the way, but the overall vision and the goal did not change. We got right near the top, the surroundings changed and the company changed, because now suddenly there's a lot of people around. We're having these conversations and we're wandering, and I say wandering because compared to the first ascent, going from where we, bless you, from the top of the ascent up to the peak was relatively easy climbing. Anybody know what a false peak is? When you're climbing a mountain, you look up and you can see the top of it. And you climb up to the top, and then it turns out that there's more mountain. And then you climb to the top of that, and then it turns out there's more mountain. So the false peak is when you think that you're going to be at the top, but you're not necessarily at the top. And you can write your own spiritual metaphor in that as well, because we all have false peaks. By the way, setting aside the whole mountain climbing thing, when somebody tells you that they have reached the spiritual peak and that they are enlightened and they are at the top of the mountain and there's no further way to go, run away. Because while there are some people who have reached that level of enlightenment, they're generally enlightened enough that they're not going to brag about it anymore. So when somebody's bragging that they've made it, that they've arrived, that they know all the answers, they probably don't. So be very skeptical. So here I am on the walk along the Vermont's Long Trail up towards the top of Mount Mansfield. And the people there are very friendly, because there are generally 3 sorts of people who are on that hike. There are the people who are hiking the Long Trail, which goes from Massachusetts to Canada, goes the entire length of Vermont, and it's across the top of all mountains. It takes about 2 weeks to do this, sometimes 3. And they've got big backpacks and sleeping bags, and they're carrying their food and enough water, and they've got the logistics of the trip organized, and they're making somewhere between 10 and 20 miles a day on this trip. Those are the ones who are committed. Then there are the day hikers, the people who are just there for today, smaller pack. And then there are the folks who are just kind of scampered up the mountain, maybe in the gondola, who are very, very casual about the whole thing. But nobody goes up to the top of that mountain looking for a fight. Everybody goes up that mountain because they're looking for some joy, they're looking for the experience, regardless of how it is that they're going to be doing. So there's a lot of camaraderie amongst the people who are doing that. And as we're going up, there's a turnoff, so the next stop is going to be the peak, which is called the Chin on Mount Mansfield. And the guy who's climbing down says, "You're almost there." And I said, "There's no way for me to know that." And he says, "Yeah, I could be lying." Because he knew that the difference between truth and encouragement is just a matter of opinion. You run into very interesting people. Which reminds me of the couple who were dancing. They go dancing again, and the same thing happens again. The guy says, "When you do the turn, you're kicking me in the shins, and it really hurts." And she says, "You know, I'm getting tired of hearing about your shins. You keep talking about yourself." And he's frustrated because now he's got the dance that he likes to do with her, and he's also got his shins that he'd like to protect, and he's not able to get the message through. And she's having the experience that she just wants to go out and have a dancing experience, and he's complaining. And there are a lot of different ways that can go. And we'll get back to that. So as I'm slogging up the hill, as I'm in the midst of this delightful mountaineering experience, periodically my daughter gets a ways ahead of me or she gets a ways behind me, and we're just climbing because there's some physical exertion involved. And at one point, after I'd been quiet for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, she used to say, "Dad, what are you thinking about?" And it's always interesting when somebody does that, because my mind goes to something and then something else and then something else. And so when I get interrupted in the middle of that train of thought, I just tell somebody where I was. And sometimes they go, "Oh, that's really cool." Sometimes they go, "Really? How did you get to that?" So I said, "I'm thinking about this demo that I have to do at work. Got a big project for Stanford University, and we're connecting a whole bunch of database things together. And I know how to do most of it, but the pieces that I don't know about are how to connect to their existing systems, because they've got an Oracle database for their finances, and they've got a PeopleSoft database for their students, and I'm not sure how to connect that." She says, "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "I'll just make it up." I know how our system works. I'll say, "Well, if you find somebody who understands how those work, we can figure out how to make it work." So I figure, and that's kind of what I'm doing, is going through how am I going to do what I can do, understanding what's mine, and how am I going to leave aside that which is not mine. And we continue hiking, we get up to the chin, and it's wonderful. It's just a wonderful day of climbing. That's because we hadn't climbed down yet. But when we got up to the peak, and we're sitting there, and you can see 360-degree view, you can see all the way over to Lake Champlain, you can see most of the way to Canada. I'm not sure where the Canadian line is, it's not as obvious as Lake Champlain. But just beautiful, beautiful view in every direction. And the people who are up there have all made it to the summit of the tallest peak in Vermont, because that's what they wanted to do. And so we got into a conversation with some of them, some of the youth, the 20-somethings who were hiking the Long Trail. They'd started in Massachusetts, and there were 3 of them, and they were hiking together that day. They didn't start out together, they just were in the same shelter a couple of nights, and they managed to be on the trail together. And so we start talking about people, and we start talking about relationships, and being there with my daughter, and having her perspective on that. Got one of the hikers to say, when his observation was, sometimes he's in a situation where 2 people who are in a relationship start having an argument in front of a group of people. You've been in that situation where you see these 2 people and they're having a fight. And he says that one of the things that he brings up all the time is he says, don't be questioning their decisions, because you were one of them. Which is wonderful spiritual mountaineering insight as we're looking towards whatever our next peak happens to be. And the same thing applies for the couple that's dancing. Because when she brings up that she wants to go dancing again, and he says, "I really don't want to go dancing again unless we work out the thing about getting kicked in the shins." She says, "Oh, so you're saying it's my fault?" And he says, "I'm saying I don't want to get kicked in the shins. I want to work out a different way that we can engage in this activity that we're both enjoying so that we can do it together." And there's a couple of different roads that can go down. If it's going to be this is splitting us apart, then the more they discuss it and the farther they go down those paths, the farther apart they're going to get. Or if they manage to get to the point of, what can I bring to this situation? How is it that I can make something new and wonderful happen here? Letting go of the thought that you need to change something, or letting go of the fact that I have to be able to do things exactly the way that I've been doing, and working out something new together, a negotiation, a discussion, a compromise, and a new agreement. It completely changes the dynamic. Anything can happen. So as we're going to that next highest peak, the scariest thing is to think that we know where that peak is, and we know what it's going to mean when we get there. And even more astounding is that we know what our experience is going to be on the way to that peak. Because when I'm thinking about climbing one of these mountains in Vermont while I'm in Philadelphia, I'm not thinking about how my hips are going to feel as I'm climbing down a granite mountain, 2,400 feet. boy, by the time we got to the end of that hike on Thursday, I felt every step. Because the 240 flights up that my Fitbit counted, it didn't count the 240 flights down. But we survived it, and it was wonderful to be in the experience, and it's even more wonderful to have had the experience together. So we finished the hike, and we were sweaty, and we're exhausted, and it's a long drive to get back to where we were going, and it turned out that we were supposed to get together with my cousin, but it made more sense to change the schedule. And then it turned out that my brother was going to be coming up and staying with us at the condo anyway, so he was going to be there for the hike the next day. Weren't expecting that, but it's a wonderful opportunity for something new to be showing up. And then my daughter decided, I don't need to go hiking again. She'd been hiking in Virginia, or West Virginia, the week before. So she said, yeah, I've had enough hiking. I'm just going to sit on the deck at the condo and do yoga. You guys go hike. So the hike the next day, we were staying at Sugar Bush. And the ski area where we used to ski was Mad River. And there are 3 peaks in a row. The one in the middle is Mount Ellen. I did not realize when we were scheduling the trip that Mount Ellen is the 2nd highest peak in Vermont. My Fitbit knew it. And because it's 3 peaks and it's along the ridgeline, it was actually about twice as long as the trip the previous day. So a second pretty intense hike that we're going to be doing together. And there was every reason in the world to say, yeah, Tori's not going to do this, and I don't really feel like doing this, so I'm going to do something easier. I'm going to bail. I'm going to not put the effort into making that happen. And I realized when I get back to Philadelphia, whatever was a little bit easier while I was in Vermont might not be so important. So let me go through the experience and see what the experience is going to be. So we get started nice and early. We're going to be climbing the mountain together. And it turns out that my brother, who's been working on this project, didn't know if he was going to be able to make the time free. The project got extended, so he was able to take a day off. And he met us in Vermont. And Tori drops us off at the trailhead. And we start climbing. And I asked Dave, my brother, what's going on at work? So he starts telling me about the project that he's doing, which is a database integration with Oracle. I said, oh, I have a question for you. I was still on vacation, and what I thought about the day before showed up as an answer. I have much more detail now than I could possibly want to know because we had 12 miles to walk, and we exhausted the subject before we got to the first peak. I couldn't have planned that. It was one of those opportunities where the universe said, hey, let's have some fun here. As long as we're doing this anyway, and as long as there's this opening, let's go ahead and fill the opening now. And what I want to do is be able to be joyous about that. Isn't that cool? Isn't that fun? I got back and I did the demo with the client, and they thought it was, I just told them the story. I said, I didn't know how this thing with Oracle was going to work, and then it turns out my brother is like a consultant who was working on an Oracle thing. Interestingly, I didn't have to tell her any more about how we were going to do it than I was planning to when I didn't know anything. But she now thought that I knew something, and I was perfectly okay with that. There are a whole bunch of other experiences that we had along the way, including meeting a family at the top of Mad River, the ski area where my parents met in the base box 62, 63 years ago. And the woman and the husband, and they were there with their 2 daughters, and it turns out that her parents had met at the same ski area about the same time ago, also from New Jersey. So it was a different clique, but they were all doing the same thing, and it was wonderful to hear how her path had changed versus how my parents' paths had gone, even though both families had spent our childhoods skiing the same mountain. And it's wonderful to see how those connections are going. It's wonderful to see that he and I are carrying day packs and got 3 liters of water, and she and her 11-year-old daughter are wearing running shorts and sneakers, and she's carrying a piece of aluminum foil. And usually you carry trail mix or some kind of supplies, nourishment, whatever. And this is a relatively tall mountain. This is like 2,200-foot climb they've just done up a ski area. Before they head back down, she says to her girls, who wants some more pig bacon? She opens up the aluminum foil, and there's bacon in there. That's what she brought. It's bacon instead of trail mix. And her daughter said, I'll have a piece, I'll have a piece. And I said, pig bacon? She says, yeah, usually we eat turkey bacon, but they didn't have any turkey bacon at the gas station where we bought this. It's like, I've been planning this climb from Philadelphia and putting a lot of attention into the details, and she's stopping at the gas station and picking up an aluminum foil full of pig bacon because that's all she needs for her family. And it's not like one of them is better than the other. One of them is more relevant than the other. It doesn't, when somebody's climbing the entire long trail with a huge pack and their sleeping bag and they're, making that entire trek, they're not a better or more significant or more important climber than the one who's scampering up to the top and back down carrying a fistful of bacon. The universe doesn't care what the intention is when we set out on the trek. The universe is saying yes. The universe is always saying yes. We get to set our intention. We get to say what the question is, what the request is, what the demand is. Because if the demand is, I want to have my shins not get kicked, that's a different demand than I want to be able to dance in comfort with my partner. If the demand is, I don't want to hear his complaints anymore, that yes is going to mean something different than when the demand is, I want to find a new way so that we can dance joyously and comfortably together. So think about your question. Think about what you want to experience next, because the universe is saying yes. Doesn't matter what the question is, the answer is yes. So dream big. Reach for whatever it is that you want to create in your life, because the answer is already yes. Not because you know the special password, not because you know how to ask, just because that's the nature of who you are. You are that divine light of God's love, and you deserve all of that good. So open yourself up to it, and allow the universe to fill you with that good, and say yes. So it is. Namaste.
Namaste.